there's just such a consistency and such a streamlining of the separation issue.
Yes.
And you could say a lot about the school, but they were consistent. They were doggedly consistent.
I don't know,
Um,
Brother Cliff, I don't know who's going to watch this, but if anybody does, I would highly recommend them to go to Brother Ennis's website, Pastor
Okay.
Ennis
You
out
were
in San
telling me about
Francisco.
that.
And he preached this series a couple years
David
ago.
Ennis.
David Ennis. He preached
Okay.
a series of messages that are, I just listened to him myself just a few weeks ago. 19 messages on biblical separation. And it is phenomenal. It is so badly needed in our day and age. And he makes the statement that every single theological book that you read about systematic theology, you have chapters in there on pneumatology, on soteriology, on eschatology. You've got all this, baptism by immersion. You've got all these chapters, but never, ever, ever, and never in any of them is there ever a chapter on separation. None of them. And yet that's a doctrine that is clearly taught in Scripture. And I don't know what it is, but we are so afraid of separation. And I'm only saying that because there are times when we need to separate. We're not doing that. We're afraid. We're afraid of that word. We're afraid of that dynamic. And I think that it's very sad. Very sad.
There's another term they used to use in the 90s in reference to Pensacola, and that's syncopation.
Yeah.
What is syncopation? I never really could figure out what syncopation was. You have the little light drum in the back. What is syncopation?
To be quite honest with you, that's so ignorant.
Okay.
That's so ignorant.
Okay.
Mozart, Beethoven used syncopation.
Okay.
There's nothing wrong with syncopation.
Okay.
Now, I think what has happened in some of these more ignorant minds is that syncopation has kind of come to symbolize the rock beat. And it's not. That's not syncopation. I mean, syncopation is involved, but syncopation is involved in all music. And anything that, yeah. So when you have a dotted quarter note followed by an eighth note, you've got syncopation. So that's kind of a no-brainer.
Okay.
Syncopation is not the issue. The issue is the rock beat and the association that it brings.
That's one thing Dr. Bob Sr. always said, and that was wherever he went to speak, wherever he would preach, he would let them know where he stood, before he preached. That's one of the things as I look at a website, I'm in prison ministry, and I'm always looking for the About tab where they'd say, doctrinal statement.
Yeah.
This is where we stand.
Yeah.
And but he always wanted to let people know where he stood, to let them know, hey, I'm gonna have full liberty when I come here. This is where I stand. I stand on the fundamentals of the faith.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts, if you have any, about the one of the books that I remember was required reading when I was in Baptist history was SBC House on the Sand. And if I remember right, the thesis of that statement is how the Southern Baptist Convention is set up. It's doomed to failure. That's kind of the thesis of that.
Okay, I've never read it, so
You never read that book?
No, I never read
Well, I guess
that
that was before. You were in the 70s. That was before
Yeah.
the conservative resurgence and things like that.
Yeah.
You have any thoughts about the convention or anything?
No, you know what? I don't. I
Okay.
don't. I'm pretty ignorant when it comes to Southern
Okay.
Baptist. All I know is we were to stay away from it. When I was a rep for the university,
Okay.
I was never allowed to go to a Southern Baptist church.
Really?
Yeah, and I don't know. I doubt that's. And in fact, I know that's not the case anymore. I know that they're.
You were not allowed.
I was not
as
allowed.
the face of the university
As
to
a
go
face-
into a Southern Baptist
I was
church.
never allowed to go into a Southern Baptist church. No, or a Southern Baptist school.
Wow.
Even if I was invited.
Really?
Yeah.
How about, did they have any rules about, let's say, Presbyterian Church in America or any of those groups?
Yeah. I had a sheet, and it was updated continually of the kinds of churches that were off limits to us, and the kinds of
Really?
schools that were off limits. Yeah,
Really?
they were very careful about that. Very careful.
Well, I remember when I was a student, you had the approved church list, and it was still like 100 churches.
Yes.
But there were no Southern Baptist, no
Right.
PCA, no
Right.
UMC, any of these
Right.
sort of groups.
Yeah.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's something. Now, one thing you always mention about one of the dangers in fundamentalism is the Calvinism that's creeping in. I know, when I was at Bob Jones, you just weren't allowed to harp on it one way or the other. They didn't want any dissension. I remember I had a roommate, Reformed Baptist,
Yeah.
And my junior year from Alaska. And we were talking about second coming of Christ. And I remember him handing me a book and saying, "Here, read this. This is what I believe." And it was Amillennialism Today was the name of the book. And I said, "Well, just tell me what it says." He said, "Oh, no, you have to read the book." but that's neither here nor there. But what are your thoughts on Calvinism and fundamentalism? Is it neutering the movement? Or, I mean, would you go that far as to say that? Or is it?
I think it's killing us.
Okay.
I think it's killing us. Yeah.
Okay.
It's almost like and I'm stepping into territory here that I'm probably not qualified to really address adequately. But I think we're stepping into an area where soul winning is no longer important. I mean, if they're going to get saved, they've been chosen, they're going to get saved. I have never ever seen a ministry that's better off because they became Calvinistic. It always kills the church, always. And I think that it encourages lethargy, no longer soul winning. And what's kind of interesting is that in that movement, they don't use evangelists. I'm never invited to a church like that.
An evangelist is redefined.
Yes. Yeah.
As a missionary.
Yeah.
Is that,
probably.
okay.
Probably.
Okay.
Kind of depends on the pastor.
Yeah.
But I read a book a couple of years ago that was so helpful on Calvinism. Was it the danger of, what's it called? The danger of Calvinism. But anyway, he says in there.
Do you remember?
I don't remember.
Okay.
I don't remember. But it's a great book. Oh, it's a wonderful book. But he just says in there that no matter what kind of angle you take on Calvinism, as a Calvinist, if you believe any of it, you have to believe, you have no choice, you have to believe that God chooses people for hell. No matter what branch you do, whether you're a 3-pointer, a 4-pointer, or a 5-pointer, doesn't matter. You have to endorse the fact that God chooses people for hell. And I thought that was really interesting.
Now, of course, the counterpoint that's always made is, well, C.H. Spurgeon, was a 5-point Calvinist.
Yeah.
Jonathan Edwards, George Whitefield, these men, but they were out there preaching the gospel.
They were soul
out there
winners.
preaching the gospel.
Yeah.
So that's so there is a sense in which there is a strain of Calvinism, this new light, as the early Americans would call it, Great Awakening sort of a Calvinism, but there's another set of more what you would call maybe fatalism sort of brand, kind of a high brow.
Yeah.
That's one of the things I think is missing in our churches is blue collar evangelism and blue collar outreaches.
Yes, I agree.
The Oliver Green, the J. Vernon McGee, put it on the bottom shelf.
Yes.
And the apologetics, with the fall of like Ravi Zacharias, you can have all the answers to all the questions and argue every atheist in the country, and yet your personal life be trash.
Yes.
And not even be born again.
Yes. Yeah.
So apologetics is something I think that has its limits.
Yeah. Absolutely. Sure.
So you had, So the George W. Bush controversy was under your time when he went and spoke at Bob Jones University.
Yeah.
Did that affect you any, or that helped the university, didn't it?
I probably. And wasn't that may have happened? Did that happen before I was a rep?
Well, that would be in 2000.
Was it 2000? Okay, rep, so I would have been a rep then.
Yeah.
It really was a non-issue for us out on the front line. I didn't really have to deal with that too much. Of course, I'm with teens a lot, so they could care less. You're right though. It probably helped the university.
You were there for accreditation.
Yes, I was. Yeah. And we never had a sports program as long as I was a rep. And,
So lots changed. Were they the Bruins by the time you finished?
Yes, they were. They were the Bruins by the time I finished. Yeah.
I went in the bookstore at Bob Jones. I had a discount or something, and I was looking at the sweatshirts and the T-shirts, and I said, "Don't you have anything in here without a bear on it?" and the girl behind the counter said, "You sound like my parents." So I think but anyway. So what? Any thoughts about your life of ministry and anything else you'd like to share?
that life after the university for me has been wonderful. Life with the university was wonderful. So I have no complaints. As an evangelist, anymore, and I hate to say this, Cliff, I hate to say this.
You just be honest.
But,
we need to hear it.
But as an evangelist, it's almost better off for me to keep the fact that I'm a Bob Jones graduate hidden. Because it has gotten so that the reputation of the university is no longer what it once was. And there are a lot of men out there, good men, who can't recommend Bob Jones anymore. They're sending their preacher boys to Maranatha, and you know, it just hurts because I gave so many years of my life to promoting Bob Jones. But now as a full-time evangelist, not associated with Bob Jones, I thought it would hurt me more, but it hasn't. I've had the busiest fall I've ever had. Booking, you know, around 2 years in advance, and so, you know, the Lord's in control. You know, the Lord knows, but it sure is sad to see the direction of churches. I'm hearing over and over again that churches are getting smaller and older. The congregation's older. Young people are now going to your more seeker-friendly environments, and they're very non-committal. You know, you'll hear the leaders of those churches talk about the fact that young people don't give. You know, they want to do their one service a week and be unaccounted.
Yeah.
So we're in a world of hurt, no question.
You know, Bob Jones Sr., he one time said, if you sit on a fence, I believe was his illustration, you'll get shot from both sides. So as long as you try to straddle a fence, you're not going to please anybody.
Yeah.
You know, and if you move, you're going to produce friction. You know, I remember those sayings in the classrooms that would be on the wall. I just really was encouraged by that.
I've heard people say many, many times associated with the university that Dr. Bob Sr. would no longer be welcomed on campus.
Wow.
Yeah. His preaching would no longer be welcomed.
Well, you know, I've heard it was some blogger. Now, a blogger will say anything, you know, but even the idea of Sheffy, you know, Bob Jones Sr. was just a simple country preacher.
Yes.
And Sheffy, you know, had no formal education, you know, unlicensed. Perhaps the trademark movie of Bob Jones University is Sheffy. That's the height, the pinnacle.
Oh, what a great movie
we went to my reunion, and I took two of my boys with, and they were giving out clippings of the old reel-to-reel Sheffy.
Oh, yeah.
And, you know, I said, well, put them in a church relics chamber or whatever. But anyway, they've remastered it. They're going to remaster all their movies, which is great.
Yeah, and they're putting it on CD. And
but the idea of scholarship, you know, over soul winning and spirituality, you know, because Sheffy, you know, some would say, well, he was unlearned. He didn't know the Hebrew and Greek like he should. Just dismissed by modern scholarship, which, you know, looks down its nose at people like that.
When the university made that movie, they were really promoting personal accountability, personal soul winning. You know, going out there and being like a Sheffy, even though you got a good education, your education was just to help you to be a better testimony. But, you know, the Bible does say, if we're not careful, that knowledge can puff up. It can make us proud. And I think that you see that a lot, not just at the university, but I think in general here in America and Christianity, you know, we're really proud of our degrees and our sophistication. And I've got a great quote that I like to share with congregations that D. Martin Lloyd-Jones shared about the fact that there was a day and age when people would get emotional. You know, they weren't afraid to show emotion and rip out an amen. And Martin Lloyd-Jones says that now we think that we're so sophisticated, we don't need that anymore. And I love the little phrase, and Martin Lloyd-Jones says this, and he says, God help us. God help us. You know, there's a fervor there that's lacking.
Well, there was a devotional scholarship, someone like Dr. Stuart Custer.
Oh, yeah.
And, you know, he could take a passage and he could break it apart in the Greek, and yet he could weep over a passage and be broken over it.
Yeah.
You know, and so scholarship in and of itself is not bad.
No.
As long as it's with, you know, like, you know, a broken heart, like Martin Lloyd-Jones. He was no...
humble heart, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Stuart Custer and different ones like that.
Yeah.
Well, what would you say, you know, to future as the university moves forward, as fundamentalism moves forward? what would you say if you just could just say, "Hello, I've got my bullhorn. Here's 5 minutes or 2 minutes or whatever." What would you say?
Let's back up. Stop. Let's go
Okay.
back to the old-fashioned preach hard and good standards and promote holiness and stop. One of the big things that the university has done in recent years, and it's kind of troubling, is that they started getting an attitude in the administration that we want to retain students. We're losing students. They're not coming back after their freshman year. So they started doing this survey. Every course has a survey.
I took that survey.
Yeah.
They sent it out to the alumni as well.
Everything's about survey because they want to get the opinion. They want to know what young people are thinking. What do they not like? And so really what has happened is that almost our theology has been conformed to what we like. We point a finger at Bill Hybels, who started this church by going around neighborhoods and knocking on the doors asking, what would you like in a church? Yet that's kind of what's happening in the university. We're asking the inmates what they don't like and like about the prison. And so because of that, it no longer has the fingerprint that it once had, and I think that's so sad. And the university in recent years has always had the attitude, we don't want to be small, so we need to make sure that we do all we can to retain student retention. You heard it over and over again, and so because of that, I think we've surrendered our standards, and so my personal plea would be, don't be afraid to be small. Let's go back to that good old gospel, the old-fashioned gospel, and bring the standards back. But I know that's not going to happen.
It was a 1990s promotional video, and it had Bob the Third and Stephen and Bob the Fourth there. And it was kind of the whole attitude of that video was, if it's not going to remain the same,
Yeah.
we'll just shut it down.
I showed that video over and over and over and
Okay,
over
so
again,
you've seen it. Okay.
all over New England and New York. Yeah, I know that video very, very well.
I'd love a copy if you have one.
I don't.
Okay.
I had to turn all that back in.
Okay.
We separated ways. Yeah.
But that was kind of the idea of that video,
Yeah.
if I remember right.
Yeah, it was.
So.
Yeah.
Well, Brother Mike, it's good having you here in the
Well,
church.
thank you,
and,
Pastor.
I appreciate you just kind of you remind us of the old paths and just where we need to be, and the old-fashioned revival and
Amen.
hard preaching, but
Yeah.
yet you're not afraid to quote the Greek. You're not afraid to bring out what the text is saying, and that balance
That's my
of
goal.
being with the Bible and yet having that excitement and that application is really helpful.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
God bless.
All right, you too, Pastor.
Let me get this
Thanks,
thing.
Thanks for inviting me. Thank you for being one of the few pastors that still uses an evangelist.
Okay, all right.